Welcome to the Essentially You podcast, Dr. Stephanie Estima. How are you doing today, girl?
I am so good and just thrilled to be back on this podcast. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, I love having you. I've been savoring the moment for this conversation, and I'm so excited for all the things that are coming into your world, all of the amazing ways that you are showing up in the world too. And what we're going to be talking about today is a topic that so many of my listeners are looking to dive into, and that is basically eating and training. So eating and working out, moving our bodies according to our cycle. And then also some major considerations for these changes as we approach like perimenopause and menopause. Because girl, it all just kind of, we have to make those considerations.
Yeah. And I'm there too. Like I would consider myself in perimenopause right now. So it's a very important topic for me. And it's up front and center in terms of, well, how can I learn how to take care of myself? And then how can I help and, take care of all the other women as well around me?
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about kind of you navigating, I would say early perimenopause, looking
early.
Gorgeous doing it.
Yeah, it's early still, but
it's early.
But it's funny because I used to dread, like I used to think, okay, that's when you turn into this spinster, you age and you're this, all these different words that you have this connotations around this time. And it's actually something where I've completely reframed it and I'm totally excited about this time because this is when you can really cue in, attune with what your body's telling you. I mean, if there's any time, it's now, right? I mean, all throughout your life, it's important to be connected to yourself. But I think as your body is starting to navigate that change with your menstrual cycle and your cyclicity and the cadence around that, it's such a wonderful time to be able to, I always say, like, get underneath the throat, right? Like get out of your head, get into your body and learn what she's trying to tell you, learn what your body is trying to tell you, and to be able to appropriately respond to the signals, the symptoms, the things that are popping up for you in order to be able to express your vitality and your optimum, your optimization.
I 100% agree. I think we get to know ourselves so much better at this time if we choose to do so, if we choose to listen to that intuition. But then also I think about like, yes, we've been fed these crazy myths and lies about what this particular, phase in our life should look like. Yeah. And, that we're destined towards old age or whatever craziness that we're being fed over here. And then I think about, I've watched your transformation. I've been so blessed to be a dear friend of yours for quite some time. And like, girl, like this is the time, not only have you're just getting sexier. Can we just say that for one? But
I'll pay you for that afterwards. I'll pay that out to you afterwards. Thank you.
So the other thing is that you are stepping in to bigger, right? To like change agent status. Like you think about what this phase for you has been, the levels of up leveling, not only for your body, not only for your emotional and mental well-being and your mindset, but then also career-wise. Like if anything, this is where we rocket. This is how I feel about this phase in our lives. And especially if we listen to our bodies, we can just really navigate this in a very different way.
Yeah. And first of all, thank you for saying that. That's so kind. And I reflect the exact same into you. You are so graceful, and the things that you punch out, the book that's coming up, the podcast, all the things that you've created, you do it with grace and ease. And you're just an example for, women, friends like me to be able to aspire to, but also for the people that you serve. So thank you for those kind words. But I think it's true. I think when we're younger, there's a certain societal, cultural, have to look a certain way. And at least for me, I can share what my story has been. It's really just, I would live above my throat, right? Like I would live in my head. If I stepped out of line in terms of my eating, there was, excessive hours of cardio, there was punitive thoughts, there was hateful words, there was all of these things trying to force my body to look and perform and do and be a certain way. And I think that there's a maturity that happens and a coming into your own skin, I think that happens in perimenopause and in through menopause that is just really sexy. There's something really sexy about, and sexiness is like, it's birthed from within, right? Like you are sexy from within. It comes from, I think, a sense of knowing who you are, a sense of feeling comfortable in your skin and being able to take care of yourself in the way that you should, not what some external societal norm is telling you to do. You need to look, be, eat, speak a certain way, you learn like, no, this is actually what feels good for me. And I think that for most women, I think we come into that around 30s and 40s, like around the time of perimenopause, where we're like, you know what, this patriarchal world order, I'm just going to sit it up on the shelf and I'm going to do what's actually good for me, the woman, not the small man, the female. Yeah.
Yes. I think
Yeah.
one of the sexiest things that I'm seeing we as women stepping into is really speaking our truth.
Yeah.
That is one of the sexiest things I'm seeing. And so, yeah, redefining the word sexy. I like to say everything's sexy. And so
Yes.
I'm always like, sexy this, sexy that. And so for me, it's like hearing a woman live her truth and have that ownership is the sexiest thing to me, and really just walk in that because you can see it. You can see it a
Mhm.
mile away.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
I agree. You can feel it. You can feel it. You're like, okay, this woman loves who she is. She's confident. She's accepted all of her light and all of her dark. And I think that that's another rite of passage for most women is we have these, whatever type, however you want to define trauma, right? Like big T trauma, little T trauma. We come in and we own it. And we're like, okay, I love all the parts. I love all the dark parts. I love all the scary parts, the ugly parts, the sloth, like all the inner, all the things that we run away from when we're younger. And then you also love all your bright, shiny, sparkly bits too. Yeah.
I love all of that. Well, one of the things I know that you have just really dialed in, not only through cutting edge research, but also through really supporting so many women through is how to eat, how to nourish our body, how to provide our body with that critical information according to our cycle. And specifically looking at like changes in our hormones, our sleep, our nutrition, because our cycle, we're cyclical in so many ways. But as we're still menstruating, we're changing on a weekly basis. We're navigating this terrain every month. And so love for you to step into, and I know that you've been living this as well, and really fine dialing and fine tuning how to really eat and nourish your body for your changes and what's going on with you. So talk to me about eating according to our cycle. Like how can we really master this and more so be in tune with what's right for us?
Yeah, thank you. And this has been something that's been transformative for myself, as you mentioned, and for the women that I have spoken to and I've worked with. So one of the things that I think I really got wrong in not only as a human, as a person in terms of my eating habits, but also as a clinician early on in my earlier years was that we were small archetypes of men. We were just like smaller versions of men with just more hormones. So what I would do, both myself and my recommendations to my patients would be, okay, well, if you want to lose weight or you want to get metabolically healthy, these are the steps that you need to take. And then there was no consideration for the female cadence, for the hormonal milieu and the landscape that women have. And of course, when we think about rhythms, the most obvious rhythm is our menstrual cycle, which is about a month. So a woman will go through her entire hormonal landscape over about 28, 29 days. I mean, there's a bit of a spread there, call it like 26 to 32 days. So she will go through her entire hormonal milieu in that time. Whereas a man will go through his entire hormonal composition in about a day, right? So he will run through all of his testosterone and estrogen and it kind of resets for him the next day. And we see, of course, corporate culture is very much structured around this like wake up early, punch out a lot of work in the morning, meetings in the afternoon and socialization in the early evening.
Mm-hmm.
And women are not really built like that. We don't go through our entire cycle in a day. We go through it over the course of the month. So one of my big aha moments or my big learnings about myself was when I would try to stick to a diet, when I would try to stick to a way of eating, I would do really well, like relatively well for the first 2.5 weeks of my cycle. And then I would try to force, it was like putting a square peg in a round hole. I would continue to try to eat that way in the second half of my cycle, which is, I'm sure your listeners know, I know you talk about menstruation a lot. This is called our luteal cycle. So I would just try and force and force. And of course, every single month, mama would fall off the bandwagon. I would eat all the cookies and the chips and the crackers and all the carbs and all the things. And I would beat myself up about it. I would say, what is wrong with me? Why can't I stick to this one way of eating? There must be something wrong with my willpower. Maybe I don't want it enough. Like all the gremlin type of voices that would go on. And it really wasn't until I created a ketogenic program, I had put it in an online format. And then what I was getting from my participants in that program was, okay, I've lost all the weight. What next? And I started playing, and I talk about this in the pre-chat in my upcoming book. I took a trip to Italy, and I had just had a very tumultuous divorce with young children. My clinic had burned down. I was just exhausted. And my periods were always the worst. They were always it was me versus my period. I would try to force and force.
It was
and
like
force.
A war zone.
It was a war zone. And I was always like, I am going to put that square hole in the round peg or whatever. And it never worked out for me. My breasts were always tender, swollen, angry, belly was distended, couldn't sleep, all those things. So it really wasn't until I started tracking my cycle, understanding the different ebbs and flows of when estrogen's high, when progesterone's high, when testosterone is high, for me to start changing the macronutrient composition of the diet, where I really started to understand and have a deeper understanding of female physiology and its interplay with food. So I know this is a longer answer, but I'll kind of wrap this up and say that the way that I eat now is absolutely aligned and attuned with where I am in my menstrual cycle. So as a general rule, in our follicular phase, which is the first 2 weeks of our cycle, we tend to be much more adaptive to eating more of a ketogenic style diet. So I will tend to restrict my carbohydrates in the first half of my cycle. And then in the second half of my cycle, we're a little bit more lenient, right? So there tends to be, especially in that last week, all calories, like I have more calories in the last week, more carbohydrates, more proteins, more fats, more everything, just because it's all hands on deck in week 4, right? It's like, we are making this endometrium, whether or not you want children, your biology is pushing towards that, right? So in week 4, you are utilizing amino acids, your nitrogen utilization is higher, glycogen and glucose utilization is higher, your free fatty acids. You need to be actually eating more calories in the last week. And that doesn't mean going to Haagen-Dazs and clearing out the store. Like 10 to 15% more is usually what I recommend and what I practice myself. 10 to 15% more calories in that last week is really going to help curb your cravings. You're not going to feel like you're losing, right? Because you're not trying to fight against your own natural biology. And it's also just going to make for just a much more pleasant week right before your period. So to get just even a little bit more specific for you, in week 1, I usually, like in the bleed week, like the week where you're shedding menstruating, I typically follow a ketogenic diet during that time. So like a purely keto, like a very low carbohydrate, moderate protein, higher fat. In week 2, so now you finished your period. This is the week before ovulation.
You get your groove in week 2.
Yes. You are sexy. You are horny. Your estrogen is also plumping up everything, right? Like
everything looks good. Those lips, everything's filled out.
That's right. So I actually will increase my protein during this week. And so I will go away from a ketogenic diet and actually have more of a sort of the composition I use in week 1 is 70% fat, 20 protein, 10% carbs. In week 2, it's 40, 40, 20. So 40% fat, 40% protein, and then the remainder 20% will be carbohydrates. And that's because we are trying to profit off of testosterone. Testosterone peaks in that week prior to ovulation. That's why you feel sexy. That's why you're chasing your partner around the dining room table to get upstairs with him, right? It's because of testosterone. That's your libido. So we want to, in terms of playing the long game, we want to be maximizing on building lean muscle mass. And you can do that 2 ways. One is through your diet, which is what I'm talking about with this higher protein intake. And obviously the other part of that is resistance training, which I'm sure we'll get to today as well. So I like to increase my protein in that second week so that you can drive something called muscle protein synthesis, which is just kind of what the name sounds like. You're synthesizing new muscle proteins. And you can do that through increasing your protein in the diet. And that's something that I do. And I actually tend to lift heavier that week as well. Like when we kind of pair that with the exercise part of it, I also lift really heavy there as well. So I'm trying to get to like 4, 5, 6 reps and then I'm kind of done. But it's heavy, heavy weight. And yeah, so I try to pair my diet and my exercise based on where I am in my cycle. So that would be an example of week 2. Week 3, I kind of go back to keto, kind of go back to that week 1. And then like I already mentioned, the week 4, we increase everything. So upping the calories, upping the carbs, upping the fats, upping the proteins. Yeah.
Okay, so got a good landscape. And speaking, so it sounds like week 2 in particular, because our testosterone levels are rising up as well, is we're leveraging that to really create more muscle mass composition. So
Yes.
maybe even to help regulate insulin levels, to help regulate blood sugar levels, help to keep our metabolism more resilient and flexible during that time. So that makes a lot of sense to me. The one question I have, because I know that we've spoken so much, even here on the podcast, you and I, is about intermittent fasting. Does that still continue to play out, or do you make modifications and changes to intermittent fasting as well throughout the cycle?
What a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking that. The short answer is yes, I do change the way that I fast through our cycle. So this really will depend on your hormonal, if you tend to be more of a PCOS type of woman where you have excess androgens or you're not aromatizing properly, or if you tend to have more estrogen relative to progesterone in that second half of the cycle. So there's a couple of different, it's like choose your own adventure kind of based
Right,
on, your
absolutely.
hormonal profile. If you're like chronically stressed, there's other ways, but I would say generally, I definitely change the way that I fast. So in the first week, that week where we were talking about the ketogenic diet, your body can also take more aggressive types of fasts. So there are different categories of fasting, and I talk about this in the book. I often will refer to it as like the 3 levers of fasting. So you can pull a lever in terms of type, in terms of frequency, and in terms of length. So the type of fast throughout your cycle can change. If I am going to do a fast, it tends to be in my bleed week. If it's going to be a water only fast, that is when I do it, because that is when we are most resilient. Like estrogen, like all your hormones that are causing all the PMS and all that, they sort of take a bit of a vacation in that first week, right? Like the only thing that's really sort of holding down the fort is FSH there. So you just got
That's
FSH.
it. Yeah.
That's the one that's like kind of doing all the work,
She's
tatting
like,
everything.
I'm trying to handle this situation over here.
Yeah. Estrogen's gone on vacation, progesterone's on
Progesterone.
yeah,
Yep.
she's on a beach somewhere. We have FSH holding down the fort. So you are really much more resilient in that time for a more aggressive type of fast, like a water fast. So that would be the week I would recommend it. If you are someone who has excess androgens, like a PCOS type of person, or someone who is displaying more insulin resistance, then we can sprinkle in more of those water fasts throughout your cycle. But for most women, I sort of bracket it and keep them in that first week. In the second week, I generally practice intermittent fasting or a time restricted eating schedule. So there's no extended, I'm still eating every day. I'm just holding the hours in which I eat a bit more consistent. Like I tend to eat in an 8-hour eating window. Like usually I start after I work out. I used to eat from 12 to 8. Like I used to start eating at noon and then finish. But I've found I've naturally just graduated over time. I like to eat after my workout because I am like you. I like to work out in the morning. So I wake up with a lot of testosterone. I wake up and I want to like go down and lift some weights. So I will lift my weights. And
That's
then
me, girl.
yeah. I know I love you, girl. Like you and me are very like 2 peas in a pod. So I like to do my workout in the morning, and then I usually will have some protein after that. So in that second week, I'm just practicing what I would call time restricted eating, like no extended periods of time where there's no food. In week 3 and 4, so now we have
Now we're in the
ovulated.
luteal. Yeah.
Now we're in the
Ovulation has
luteal.
happened. The main event.
Exactly. The main event, the princess is out. She's waiting. The queen is out waiting for the sperm. And the hormonal landscape, as you know, changes quite a bit, right? So
Yes.
if you have any hormonal derangement, any kind of issues, this is where it tends to show up. So we tend to see more sleep disturbances here. We tend to, like your rings, they start to get tighter on your fingers, you retain more water, bowel movements slow down, all these things. So if there is some kind of estrogen dominance or again, androgen dominance, in week 3, I really like what I refer to as a caloric liquid fast. So this would be bone broth. You might be sipping on broth all day long, trying to reduce some of the inflammation. Bone broth, of course, is really, really great for joints. And that's one of the things that we see a lot in week 3 and 4 is like achy joints, headaches, this kind of like
Mood
musculoskeletal,
swings. Yeah.
all
Just
that kind. So I like to give them bone broth. In bone broth, we have a lot of different things that are going to help with joint pain. We have glycine. We have what we call GAGs or glycosaminoglycans. I always mess it up. But those GAGs are going to help with pliability of the joint. So you're going to allow for the bones to slip across each other. Range of motion can improve by having that bone broth. So I like to have the bone broth fast in the second half of the cycle. And then in week 4, again, you actually need to be eating more in week 4. So the only thing I tend to recommend there is, again, like a time restricted eating where you're not going for multiple days without food. Your body needs food at this point. And I think that's a bit of a workaround for a lot of women. Like we've always been told like calories in, calories out. We got to restrict it. We got to always be on some sort of diet. And I think in week 4, this is a time to really just let all of that go, because your body requires, and this is something I really want to get into the listener's head, like your body requires more food.
It's more energy.
Yes, you are building up an entire new organ. There is an entire new organ that the endometrium is building up in preparation for the baby. Whether or not you want it is, not your choice at this point, right?
Right. So your body's in full mode. Like it's just what it does.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I tend to have like intermittent fasting week 2 and 4, and then there can be different types of fasts in week 1 and 3, sort of depending on the type of hormonal presentation that someone might have.
And what we're talking about in that week 4 isn't the Haagen-Dazs, isn't the extra Cheetos. We're still talking about healthy carbs. We're talking about sweet potatoes. We're talking about spaghetti squashes. We're talking about, good, healthy, starches, good, healthy veggies and fruits. Those are the types of, carbohydrates we're looking at here in order to really fuel, because ultimately we're still fueling the body. We don't want to trash it.
Yeah. And it's really, you are what you absorb, right? So if you are going to be eating lots of green leafy vegetables, like you were saying, a lot of the good starches, and that actually brings me to a point I want to just talk about resistant starches, the importance of that in just a second. But you also want, like, it's not the cookies and the chips and the crackers and the Haagen-Dazs and the pizzas and the whatever. You want to also be, your goal in that second half of the cycle, if you tend to feel inflamed, is to reduce inflammation. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by increasing your your consumption of vegetables, all colors of the rainbow, but in particular greens. So in particular, we have the brassica family. We have, the kohlrabi, the Brussels sprouts, the kale, the Swiss chard, the arugula, the spinach, all the green leafy vegetables. Those all have compounds in them that are going to help you poop, which is really important in your second half of your cycle. I mean, that's the best part of getting your period, right? Is like the period poops, because your progesterone like slows down.
We need to get it out.
To get her out. So the cruciferous vegetables help with that, right? Like they bulk up the stool, they attract water to the bowel. So as it's moving through the intestinal system, it's much easier for you. You're not pooping out those little rabbit poos, those little hard little pellets.
More substantial.
Yeah, it's more substantial movement. We're talking about poo, and I'm happy about it. I don't know about you, but I love talking about
and
poo.
We know that these are powerful for detoxification. So the liver is loving you right now. It guarantees that we are metabolizing estrogen down the right pathways. It's guaranteeing that our estrobolome is happy, our microbiome is happy. There's a lot of wonderful things here. And then, like you said, the big overarching win is nobody wants and nobody needs inflammation.
Right.
And that's what so often do we just feel, you can feel that bloating.
And that's the linchpin. That's the linchpin to all disease. I mean, you can talk about cardiovascular disease, you can talk about diabetes, you can talk about metabolic stuff. Inflammation is the linchpin. It is the common thing with all of those diseases. So our goal, and as we like in perimenopause and as we move towards menopause, we actually have a tendency to become more insulin resistant. We have a tendency to have more inflammation. So it is very important for us to be mindful of how we can be reducing our inflammation, in particular in that second half of the cycle. So the cookies, the chips, and the crackers, like throw them out the window. Have more of the brassica family.
I know women are listening to this right now and they're like, is she trying to tell me to swap out ice cream for Brussels sprouts? Oh, hell no.
And listen, 80-20 rule, right? Like you can have ice cream. I'm not saying that you can't have it.
Coconut ice cream.
Coconut. Yeah. It can have coconut ice cream. Yeah. You can have it, but it's what you do 80% of the time, right? That is going to yield the majority of the result. Like we just had Canadian Thanksgiving. I know we do it like super early, like way before you guys, but like
you guys are so much cooler than we are over here.
It's actually quite
October
uneventful
Thanksgiving,
here.
Okay. We do not wait for November.
Yeah. November is too cold for
For
Thanksgiving
us,
for us.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, you can have the pasta and you can have the things for special occasions, but it's what you do, in your everyday week that's going to really leading up to some bigger holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving that are going to really allow for that flexibility.
Mm. Well, and I think it's so important that you bring up the insulin resistance. I always say the hormone to be on the lookout for in our 40s is insulin.
Yes.
And that's the one I know progesterone and estrogen, they're just getting their spotlight, but it's insulin that I'm most concerned with for
Yeah.
women, and it's inflammation.
Yeah. She's sneaky.
She
Yeah.
is a sneaky. Yes, she's insidious. She's like behind the scenes, and the doctors aren't connecting the dots. So they're not looking at it. They're not seeing that connection. I love how you've laid this out. Now, I know some women are listening and they're thinking, oh my gosh, my head's spinning a little bit. But you got a book coming out. I know we're going to be talking about that when it comes out in February. So no worries. And you've got a little bonus guide, which we're not even close to talking about yet. But I just want to let everyone know, if you're thinking to yourself, I couldn't take notes fast enough, I couldn't get all this on paper, Dr. Stephanie Estima knows that this is a process, and so she's got a little bonus for us towards the end. But what I want to do is I want to segue to moving our bodies as well.
Yes.
So we've kind of laid out metabolically how we can eat and support our bodies throughout our cycle. And I think that there's probably a massive collective exhale around that PMS time.
Yeah.
Where we have all just been given permission to increase the caloric load, to not beat ourselves up, because our bodies, those cravings are coming in. We're not sure why. We're told that's not okay. And right now we're being told biologically, based on how much mitochondria are needing support right now, because your ovaries have the most mitochondria in the entire body. All of the processes that are gearing up to make the perfect terrain for maintaining a pregnancy or getting a pregnancy, whether you want it or not, your body's just going to do it.
Yes.
This is what it looks like to make it happen. And if it hopefully it's all clicking into place for everyone listening, that there's a reason why, 4 to 5 days before your period, you are ravenous and you are probably feeling a little bit of shame and blame, but this is a reason. And now we understand.
And it's not your body going rogue. Like, it's not your body.
No, it's doing what it's supposed to do.
It's doing what it's supposed to do. And just for context, you mentioned mitochondria, the oocyte, so the ovary, the cells in the ovary, 100,000 mitochondria. Mm-hmm. So just for comparison, when we look at a myocyte, when we look at a cell in the heart, 5,000. A hepatocyte or a liver cell, 2,000. Your ovaries are
and a neuron is just I think it's around 10.
Yeah. So think about 100,000 to 5,000 to 2,000. Like, they are like the eyes that they are the eyes in your womb, right? Like, there is so much information. They require that much energetic or energy producing capacity. Mm-hmm. So just soften a little bit and surrender into the idea that it's what makes you uniquely and beautifully female.
Well, and let's just celebrate that the ovaries of every body part, man or woman, they are requiring the most energy, because at the end of the day, we are the creators of life.
Yes.
And that's what it requires. It requires a level of energy that no other cell has to be able to produce. I know people don't know that. I know that people think that the brain is like the hungry hippo, just gobbling up as much energy as it can. And no, ovaries kick the brain's butt over and over and over again.
I like that.
And it definitely kicks the testes butt and any male brain that I know of. So I just wanted to just speak into that real quick.
I love that.
Unknown fact. A lot of women don't know. Okay, so we are talking about the importance for training according to our cycle. And we touched upon this a tiny, tiny bit in that week 2. We talked about the increase in testosterone. Girl, you're talking about that heavy lifting that you're doing, building up that muscle mass, that muscle composition, especially the lean muscle mass. I know a lot of us, especially as we saunter into our 40s and our 50s, the big, big elephant in the room is that we're putting on unexplained weight gain, right? And we don't know why. We don't know what's going on. And I know that this is so tied to everything here. So talk to me about how, and I know that so many women, either we're overworking out at the wrong times.
Right.
And it's very complicated. I feel like for women, it can be really hard to really nail this.
Okay, so let's start off with a pre-frame because I hear this all the time, so I just want to nip it in the bud. It doesn't matter how heavy you lift, you are not going to turn into the Hulk. So this is another, you have to be lifting as a female, you have to be having some type of resistance training protocol. And I'll talk to you about what I have found works really, really well across a whole bunch of different types of body types and what have you. But the one thing I always bump up against is like, am I going to turn into like a guy? Am I going to, and let me tell you, if I could have found a way to make that happen, like if there was a way for me without taking exogenous testosterone for me to build muscle faster with more testosterone, I would have found it. You cannot bulk up as a woman. You do not have the amount, we have about 10 times less T than our male counterparts. So I just want to say that and really get women comfortable with the idea of lifting heavy and this ties into what we were saying with insulin resistance as well, because
please, girl, tell us that weightlifting is a thing that we got to be doing.
Everybody has to do it in some form or capacity. And there's a lot of, as we are in perimenopause, in particular, we've already mentioned this metabolically, that we become more insulin resistant. So meaning that when we eat a carbohydrate, it turns into glucose, and glucose will trigger insulin which is the hormone that's going to take glucose and drop it in the cell. But over time, our cells don't listen as well to insulin anymore. So we have more blood glucose. So one of the natural ways that you can improve that is by increasing your muscle mass. Your muscles are like a sponge for glucose. The more muscle mass that you have, the better glucose disposal agent you will be. And what I mean by that is when you can actually eat more carbohydrates, which is like a great thing. But it also, when you do have a carbohydrate, your muscles are going to sop it up. Like they're going to be like, just like sponges, sopping it all up from the bloodstream, because muscle is functional, active tissue. The beautiful thing about your muscles as well is once the glucose gets in there, it can't get out. Okay. Yes, it lacks the phosphate. In there. Yeah, it's in there. It's like Vegas. Like what happens there, it stays there. It can't get out. It stays in the muscle. So it is going to be exclusively for the use of for the muscle itself. So that's the first thing.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. And best believe body composition, all the things that are changing in our body. Women want to know what's the secret. We got to sop up that glucose.
Yeah. And also I would say as well, and of course, when you build muscle, you're going to look great, right? Like there's an aesthetic component to it as well, but you're physiologically going to work better. So when you do have Thanksgiving and when you do have the Christmas pudding or whatever, your body is going to be much more efficient at getting rid of that. So you are going to improve your baseline, your fasting blood glucose is going to be better. And then when you do eat more carbohydrates, you're going to be a much more efficient at getting your blood glucose back down to normal. So you got to work out. Again, as a woman, we're not small men. You can't just work out the same way all the time. So we touched on it before. I really like to lift heavy weights. I want to really profit off of that peak in testosterone. It only peaks once in the entire month. So we really want to maximize by lifting really heavy weights. And when I say heavy, like you're maxing out at 5 reps. So it's like heavy weights. You may need a spotter if you have someone around you, or, you can do what you can, as heavy as you can to, a 5 rep, 6 rep max. In week 1 and week 3, I like there to be moderate weights. And this is going to vary for everybody, but I really like to be punching out like somewhere between 8 and 10 repetitions. And whenever I say that, people are like, well, I don't know what weight, what weight is it? And a rule of thumb is always the last 3 repetitions should be they should be challenging. Like you should still be able to feel it. You should feel it. You should be able to do it with good form, but 8 to 10 repetitions. So it's moderate weight. That's going to vary from person to person based on your history with weight training, based on, your experience with it. But you will also, even if you do the exact same workout, the exact same exercises through each week, and you are playing around with the weight, you are going to see incredible results over time. So week 1 and 3, I like it to be moderate. And then week 4, it depends on the person. So I tend to like to use lighter weights this week. Things are just a bit more, it's a bit of a harder week, right? It's, we tend, even just from a mindset perspective, progesterone's dropping, we tend to have a negative bias. So
it's harder. It feels harder.
It's a harder week.
It is a harder. For me, working out in that week, I've always done it and I've always powered through it, but it's a challenging. And, until I decided that, asking my body what would really serve you right now, it's not going to the wall.
Yeah. And it's not doing like 30 spin classes,
No.
So I tend to do lighter weights that week, but a higher rep. So I'm still working the muscle. I'm still flushing out any source of inflammation there. So it's somewhere between 15 and 20 reps, lightweight. I also really like to consider fluctuation of estrogen through the cycle affects our ligaments and our tendons. So in week 2, we see estrogen's apex, right? It lifts up to its highest point in the cycle right before ovulation because it's trying to mature, help mature. I mean, estrogen is a trophic, it's a growth factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we tend to see is that estrogen makes our ligaments a little bit more slack, like a little bit more lax, and it tends to make our tendons stiffer. So what does that mean? It means that like high impact activity, so high intensity in like when you're doing sprinting or burpees or power jumps, jumping squats, this is not the week to do it because your ligaments, particularly in your knee, much more lax during this time because estrogen is so high. It is a great time to just focus on heavy weights because your tendons are a little stiffer. So once your tendons are stiffer, of course, they can transmit the force that you're exerting in the muscle to the bone much more effectively. So there's a couple times in the month, that one in particular, where I don't actually like high intensity interval training. So it's that week 2. And you mentioned type of exercise, and I often will speak to women and they'll say, I don't understand it. Like I'm doing 4 HIIT workouts a week, or I'm going to spin 5 times a week, and I just can't seem to shift this belly weight. And what that usually tells me, especially if it's belly weight in particular, is that you are driving the sympathetic, you're stressed. Yeah. So you are driving the sympathetic tone, this sympathetic system. When you are doing high intensity interval training or spin classes all the time, you are driving up inflammation and you're not allowing for time to recover. So I actually like to limit throughout the cycle, like 1 HIIT, maybe two for the average athlete, like 1 or 2 HIIT trainings a week. And then I actually like to abstain from it completely in week 2 because of that ligamentous change that we see under the influence of estrogen. So HIIT training is great. I mean, it's a great exercise, but it actually is quite, exercise in and of itself is a stressor, right? It's a hormetic stressor, like it's a good stressor over the long term, but what you're doing is you're literally ripping apart muscle fibers, right? So you need to allow for time for recovery. And that's why I like everything to be lighter in week 4. I also like to view week 4 as a bit more of a recovery week of sorts. So lighter weights, maybe Pilates and yoga is really great during this time as well. If you are looking to build muscle, all your gains happen in recovery. They don't actually happen in the gym. They don't happen with the weights. They actually happen when you're recovering. Just like when you sleep, you're repairing, right? You're getting rid of the brain crud that's built up over the course of the day. You're repairing your muscles. If you do not give yourself the opportunity to recover, and this is for the ladies that are listening that do 5 soul cycle, classes a week.
And who are doing HIIT trainings every single week and who are burning out and exhausted by 3 p.m. and who are not, the scale is either frozen or it's ticking upwards and you're super grouchy. I mean, I've been that woman where I overworked myself to the ground. And so often there's stressors happening in your life and the exercise is the tipping point.
Yes.
It's what's going to send you over the edge.
And if you're looking to change your body composition and you're not allowing for proper recovery, your body will hold on to your fat like an insurance policy.
Yeah, like survival.
Yeah,
like
it's
Armageddon's coming. Yes.
Like, why am I spinning? Why am I spinning for 45 minutes every single day? Do I really need this? Like, you have to think about how this is being perceived by your cells as well. Yeah.
I so appreciate that because I know that there are women listening right now who are working their butts off, who are doing too much, and they're not seeing any of the gains. If anything, they're seeing negative gain and they feel completely crummy. And so I'm so glad that we're talking about this specifically. I know for me, when I got my Hashimoto's diagnosis, I honestly went strictly to weight training. I took out all the cardio. I took out all the HIIT training.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because it just wasn't. And I don't know if you can speak to this a little bit, but I find that if women are in burnout phase, it's time to just lay it, like give yourself 3 weeks to a month of full recovery. Like do your hikes, do your walks, do some yoga, maybe dance around the house, but like you got to do a reset.
I love that you're bringing this up because I think that this is where we need to, as women, surrender to our feminine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like the go, 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 checking off all the to-dos on the to-do list. This is a very, and even weight training, very masculine endeavor, right? But it is the balance of the training and the recovery, allowing yourself the time to recover, surrendering to the rest, giving yourself permission to heal, saying, you know what, I am worth it. I am worth waiting for. I am worth taking some time off and allowing my body to do what it innately knows what to do. And it can be hard for, I still struggle with that type A, like gotta do, gotta do, gotta do. But my body now will, and this is kind of the beauty of perimenopause, when my body's like, listen, you can't work 12 hours anymore. You can't do that anymore. You have to, it's like 3:00. I always catch myself. I have 100 tabs on my computer and I'm just like switching between them. And I'll catch myself and I'll be like, I think I need a break.
Yeah, I think I'm becoming a zombie at my computer. I don't even know what the tabs say anymore.
Yeah.
It's so true. Well, I hadn't talked too much about this on the podcast, but I got put on restriction for my pregnancy at week 22. I kind of got my energy back around week 19. Girl, I started jump roping. I started doing jump squat. I started doing the things
I know
I love to do.
The nerd, the type A in me sees and loves the type A in you. I see it. I know it.
And I didn't realize I had a little bit of a low hanging, my placenta had dropped below. I knew it was going to wander on back up, but I had a little bit of spot bleeding, totally freaked me out. Had to go to the doctor and she's like, you're on restriction. And so had to really clearly no more HIIT training, no more jump squats, no more jump rope. I'm still been weightlifting, but been very, very cognizant and careful because again, I'm always so mindful about, I want the sponge for the glucose. I want to make sure that I've got that metabolic resilience because, you're just talking about just being in perimenopause and being pregnant, just why not both at the same time? There is the concern for gestational diabetes. And so making sure that still, honoring my body, but, just clearly listening to the indicator and just shutting it down, and clearly this is I don't know how many women listening to this right now are pregnant and in perimenopause, but for me, it was really just about that. It's
a lesson for everyone though. It's a lesson for everyone. But I think that this is a societal thing where we are taught that our worthiness is intimately tied to our productivity. So the more that we produce, the more worthy we are. So if we can begin to unhitch the idea that if I rest, that is actually one of the most productive things I can do. And if I just sit on the couch today, or if I go for a walk instead of, I don't mean to poo-poo on SoulCycle. They have great classes,
or burpees,
burpees or whatever, right? Like if I can just do something gentle, that is actually way more productive for my soul juju, rather than, oh, well, I was able to tick off 5 things off my to-do list. Aren't I worthy now? And I think that this is one of the things
it's my biggest limiting belief. And I feel like I'm always tackling it. It's, I've full like vulnerability and it's just it's my whole life. It's been tied to the worthiness of production. And now that awareness and knowing that, but it's amazing. Like you can even know that belief and be working on that belief and it can just come back. It could just creep back in, girl.
It's sneaky.
It's super sneaky.
Yeah. And it actually evolves with you over time. Like I was having this conversation. We just celebrated a year on the podcast and I remember, yay. And then I remember when I first was like hesitating about starting the podcast, like my inner voice was like, well, like who needs another health podcast? Like what's the thing that you're going to offer that's like unique? And now through the course of the year, I added on another show, which I called Geeky Magic. It's just me, so I'm not interviewing anyone. I'm just talking, just me and the listener. And before I started that, oh my God, the voice in my head was like, listen, people are only listening to your podcast because of the people that you have on. Like it's only the network. So she morphed into, what do you need another podcast? Like who needs another podcast? Why do you even need to do this? To, okay, people are listening, fine, whatever, but they're only listening for other people. If you come on and only talk, people are not going to like that. So just having an awareness, and I share that so that you know that I'm crazy.
Well, we've had these conversations and I was like, one, you need to start this podcast. 2, everyone wants to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thank you. But I share it to let the listener know that your inner critic, the person or the voice wherever it came from is going to morph over time, and she's not going anywhere. She's going to be with you forever. So it's just, you have to learn to dance with her.
Mhm.
So I, like you, I'm going to be figuring out how to step more into my feminine and more into the surrender and the slow down, because recovery for me is also difficult as well. Like if I start, like a couple months ago, I was doing some shoulder press and I felt like a little tweak and I was like, oh, I'll just like work through it.
Work
And
through it. Power through that.
injured myself in like a doorknob. Like, I should have stopped and said, okay, like shoulders hurting, something, you tweak something, like ice it, whatever. I worked through it. I injured myself. So it took me, and then of course my body was like, okay, now you can't do anything for your shoulders for 8 weeks. Did you learn your lesson? Like your body will always, like if you don't listen to the whisper,
First the whisper.
scream.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's going to backtrack you.
Yeah.
I love all these beautiful lessons. And I know that, oh my gosh, my audience is going to just soak all this up. And I know the first thing that they're going to want to do is really start to tweak their food, tweak how they're eating. Because one thing I love so much about this is that really owning our female feminine body's wisdom and aligning with that. And so this is what you've done such a marvelous job. And I can't wait to see the full masterpiece of this book come out. I'm so excited. Oh my God. But then I just love that you've got this beautiful little bonus for us to plug in now so we can get started now. So tell me a little bit about this bonus and how we can begin to use it.
So this actually, I have never offered this before. This is just going to be, this is like kind of exclusive to your podcast right now. So this is going to be a 4-week meal plan that I have created. These are recipes that I have created in my kitchen that I've used with clients around the cyclical eating that we've been talking about. So how to eat a more ketogenic diet or keto style diet in the first and the third week, how to up your protein in week 2, and then how everything kind of can increase in week 4. So I have meal plans there with all the nutrient breakdowns, all the macro breakdowns, like the instructions, the ingredients, all that kind of stuff. Really, really proud of it. Happy to give it to you guys. So I'll send you the link and you can maybe put in the show notes for your listeners.
100% will be in the show notes. We'll make sure you know exactly how to get it, everyone. Love that. And then Dr. Stephanie Estima, honey, tell us where we can check you out, girl. Talk about the podcast. Holler at us about the website. Let us know where we can find you.
Sure. So I have a podcast called Better with Dr. Stephanie. So you can listen to that wherever you listen to Dr. Marisa's podcast. You can listen to ours as well. You can find me on the gram, on Instagram. I'm at Dr. Stephanie Estima. And the website that you can go to right now would be drstephanieestima.com. So doctor, first name, last name.com.
Perfect. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Girl, your wisdom. Oh, so powerful. I love that you're connecting into the feminine in such a beautiful way and really opening the door for us to do that as well. And we could navigate this through our 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond.
Yes.
Really setting us up for success. I want to say thank you so much for that.
Let me just say, it's always such a pleasure when I get to spend time with you. So this is time really well invested. And this podcast, I mean, I've said this to you privately, I'll say it publicly. This is really your podcast, and some of the work that you have done has really been an inspiration to me, and to also start, like, you were one of the people who were like, you have to start the podcast. Here's how you do it. Here's all the tips and tricks. And so you've just been such a wonderful light from one woman to another. Thank you so much for having me on and for just being you.
Thank you, my love. Thank you so much. I feel that. Thank you. I'll see you soon, honey.